The metallic tang of recycled air filled the cabin thick with the silent tension that follows a public confrontation. At 30,000 feet, there is no escape. Below the Atlantic was a dark, indifferent canvas. On board Airline's Flight 815, a war of whispers had just concluded, leaving a battlefield of simmering resentment. A regional manager flushed with victory had publicly berated and humiliated a passenger for filming. He saw a troublemaker, a black man, in a simple hoodie looking for a lawsuit. What he failed to see, what no one on that plane could possibly know, was that the quiet man now sitting by the window didn't just have a ticket to fly on this airline. He held the title to the entire company. The manager's career was flying on a one-way trip to oblivion, and he was the only one who didn't have a clue. John F. Kennedy International Airport was as always a symphony of controlled chaos. The vast expanse of Terminal 4 hummed with the energy of 1,000 intersecting journeys, a place of tearful goodbyes and ecstatic reunions of crushing delays and on-time triumphs. It was a living, breathing organism, and Desmond Grant was here to take its pulse. To any casual observer, Desmond was just another face in the river of humanity, flowing towards the departure gates. He was dressed in a pair of well-worn jeans, a comfortable pair of sneakers, and a plain dark grey hoodie with the hood down. A simple backpack was slung over one shoulder. He was in his early 40s, with a calm, observant face that held a hint of weariness around the eyes, the look of a man who travelled often. He could have been a musician on his way to a gig, a professor heading to a conference, or a son flying home to visit his parents. He was deliberately, meticulously anonymous. This anonymity was his most valuable tool. Desmond Grant wasn't just a passenger. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Airlines, the very airline whose gate he was now approaching. 6 years ago, Aura had been his audacious dream, born from a frustration with the cattle call mentality of modern air travel. He had poured his life savings earned from 2 successful tech startups into creating an airline that prioritized human dignity. The company motto plastered on every screen and ticket jacket was Airline's humanity in motion. But lately the data told a different story. Customer satisfaction scores were slipping. Complaints about staff rudeness, dirty cabins, and operational inefficiencies were climbing at an alarming rate. His executive board presented him with sanitized spreadsheets and PowerPoints full of corporate jargon, explaining the dip's synergistic challenges, resource allocation friction, customer expectation recalibration. Desmond found the language insulting. He didn't build his empire on buzzwords. He built it on experience. It was time for him to get his own data. He called it the Phoenix Project. Once a quarter under a pseudonym and with a ticket bought through a third-party site, he would fly his own airline. He'd fly economy, check a bag, buy the overpriced water, and use the lavatories. He would experience Airlines not as its owner, but as its most average customer. His executive team hated it, citing security risks and the potential for a PR nightmare. Desmond argued the real nightmare was a CEO who didn't know what it felt like to fly on his own planes. Today's flight was Aura 815 from JFK to London Heathrow. As he navigated the snaking line at gate B24, he discreetly pulled out his phone. He wasn't taking selfies or texting. He was filming. His finger hovered over the record button as he documented the little things. The frayed carpeting near the gate podium, a piece of discarded trash that 3 different employees had walked past without a second glance. The monotone, almost hostile voice of the gate agent announcing the pre-boarding for families with small children. He filmed the smudges on the plexiglass barrier at the counter and the weary, defeated expressions on the faces of passengers who had just been told their seat assignments were being changed. This was the raw, unfiltered truth of the customer experience. This was the data his spreadsheets could never capture. He found his seat in the crowded waiting area, a hard plastic chair with a questionable sticky spot on the armrest. He angled his phone down, seemingly scrolling through social media, but the camera was still rolling, capturing the audio of the gate agent's interactions. He heard a passenger ask a simple question about overhead bin space. The agent, a young woman named Brianne, who looked utterly overwhelmed, chewed audibly before giving a curt, unhelpful answer. "It's a full flight. First come, first served." Desmond made a mental note. That was not the Aura way. The policy was to proactively offer to gate-check bags for free on full flights to ease boarding and reduce passenger anxiety. Brianne had either forgotten her training or, more likely, had been so beaten down by the system that she had stopped caring. This was a symptom of a deeper disease. The boarding process began, and it was as disorganized as he'd feared. The zones were called out of order. The agents seemed flustered. Desmond joined the queue for Zone 4, his phone still in his hand, held casually at his side. He recorded the scuffed and dirty jet bridge floor and the peeling paint on the handrail. These were small details, but they painted a picture of neglect. They told passengers, "We don't care about the details, so you probably shouldn't trust us with the big things either." As he stepped onto the aircraft, a flight attendant offered a perfunctory "welcome" without making eye contact. Desmond found his seat, 28B, a middle seat in a row of 3. He settled in his backpack under the seat in front of him and continued his discreet filming. He panned slowly to capture the worn upholstery on the seat opposite the grime in the crack of the window and a sticky-looking residue on his own tray table. He wasn't trying to be conspicuous. He was simply a man with a phone. But in the hyper-aware post-everything world of air travel, a recording device was often seen as a weapon, and he was about to be spotted by someone who viewed every passenger as a potential enemy, someone who had long forgotten the meaning of humanity in motion. Frank Miller, the JFK Regional Operations Manager for Aura Airlines, saw the world in terms of problems. A delayed catering truck was a problem. A sick pilot was a problem. A passenger with an oversized bag was a problem. His job was to solve these problems swiftly and decisively to keep the massive, intricate machine of the airline moving. Over his 15 years in the industry, his methods had become less about customer service and more about brute force compliance. He was a hammer, and every issue looked like a nail. He was in the midst of berating a baggage handler over a loading delay when his radio crackled. It was Brianne, the gate agent from B-24. "Frank, I've got a situation here." Her voice was thin and nervous. "Flight 815. There's a passenger. He was filming everything at the gate. The carpets, the counter, everything. Now he's on the plane, and a flight attendant just messaged me. He's still filming. The seat's the floor. It's weird." Frank Miller's eyes narrowed. Filming. That was a big red flag. In his mind, there were only 2 reasons a passenger filmed. The first was to document a perceived injustice to blast on social media a viral moment seeker looking for a payout. The second, and far more sinister in his view, was for casing the operation for a security threat. Either way, it was a problem that needed to be hammered down hard. "What's he look like?" Frank barked into his radio. He's a black man, maybe early 40s, wearing a grey hoodie, seated in economy around row 28. The description solidified Frank's prejudice into a concrete theory. It was the first type. The social media agitator. He'd seen it a dozen times. Someone trying to provoke a reaction, get it on camera, and then cry racism or corporate malfeasance. They were leeches, all of them. "I'm on my way," Frank said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "Do not let the jet bridge door close. I'll handle this." He strode through the terminal with the self-important gait of a man who believed his authority was absolute. He flashed his badge at the jet bridge door, pushing past the flight attendant, who was preparing to close it. "Which one?" he demanded without preamble. The flight attendant, a seasoned professional named Jessica Davies, pointed tentatively towards the middle of the economy cabin. "Row 28, middle seat. Sir, he hasn't been disruptive, just quiet." Frank ignored her. He marched down the narrow aisle, his presence sucking the air out of the cabin. Passengers looked up from their books and phones, sensing the shift in atmosphere. He stopped at row 28, his large frame looming over Desmond Grant. "Sir, I'm Frank Miller, the manager here. I'm told you're filming on this aircraft." His tone was not inquisitive. It was accusatory. Desmond looked up, his expression neutral. He slowly lowered his phone, but didn't turn it off. "I was just taking a video, yes. Our policy prohibits the recording of airline personnel equipment and procedures," Frank said, reciting a line that was at best a gross misinterpretation of company rules. There was no such blanket policy. Passengers were allowed to film their own experience, as long as it didn't interfere with crew duties or security operations. "I'm not filming any personnel," Desmond replied calmly, his voice even and low. "And I'm certainly not interfering with any procedures. I'm just documenting my seating area." "I need you to delete that footage immediately," Frank commanded, his voice rising in volume. He was used to immediate compliance. The slightest pushback was a challenge to his authority. Desmond met his gaze. "No, I don't think I will." The simple refusal hung in the air. Other passengers were now overtly watching their phones, suddenly emerging like periscopes. Frank felt a flush of anger creep up his neck. This was exactly what he'd expected. The man was baiting him. "Sir," Frank said, leaning down, his voice a menacing hiss meant to intimidate. "This is a private aircraft. If you do not comply with the instructions of the staff, I can and will have you removed from this flight." "On what grounds?" Desmond asked, his tone still perfectly level. "For taking a video of a dirty tray table." "I believe that's my right as a paying customer." The mention of a dirty tray table was a direct hit. It implied incompetence, and Frank took it personally. This wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was an insult. "That's it. You're done." Frank snarled, his professionalism completely evaporating. "You are a security risk. Give me the phone." "I'm not giving you my phone," Desmond said, his grip tightening on it. His calmness seemed to infuriate Frank even more. "Fine. Have it your way." Frank turned to Jessica, the flight attendant, who was watching with wide, horrified eyes. "Get on the horn to the captain. Tell him we have a non-compliant passenger. We're removing him." Jessica hesitated. "Sir, he's not being aggressive. Maybe we can just—" "Are you questioning my authority?" Frank snapped, turning his fury on her. "Do what I told you now." Jessica flinched and retreated towards the galley phone. Her face pale. The passengers were murmuring now, the low hum of disapproval growing louder. A woman in the row behind Desmond started filming openly. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "The man hasn't done anything wrong." Frank spun around to confront her, but stopped. He realized he was losing control of the narrative. He needed to reassert his dominance. He turned back to Desmond, his face inches from Desmond's. "Last chance," Frank seethed. "Delete the video, or I'll have Port Authority police drag you out of here in handcuffs. Your choice." Desmond Grant looked at the enraged man before him. He saw more than just a bully on a power trip. He saw a deep, systemic failure within his own company. This man wasn't just an employee. He was a manager. He was supposed to be a leader, an example of the Aura standard. Instead, he was the living embodiment of everything Desmond had fought against. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but he channeled it into an unshakable resolve. This problem wouldn't be solved by yelling back. It would be solved with precision. He held Frank's furious gaze and said nothing. He simply shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of defiance. For Frank Miller, it was the final straw. He turned and stormed back towards the front of the plane, bellowing into his radio. "I need Port Authority at gate B24. We're removing a passenger, now." The cabin door was still open. The flight and Frank Miller's career were now officially on the ground, engines burning, going nowhere fast. The atmosphere inside the cabin of Aura Flight 815 had curdled. The air, once filled with the mundane anticipation of travel, was now thick with a toxic blend of tension, indignation, and second-hand embarrassment. Frank Miller had drawn a line in the sand, and Desmond Grant's quiet refusal had transformed the aircraft into a public stage. Frank stood near the galley, his back to the cabin, speaking into his radio in clipped, angry tones. He was performing for the crew, reinforcing his own narrative. Uncooperative, potential threat, filming sensitive areas, refusing to comply with crew instruction. Each phrase was a brick in the wall of justification he was building around his actions. Jessica Davies, the flight attendant, approached him cautiously. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice low and pleading. "The captain is asking for clarification. He wants to know the specific regulation the passenger is violating. I can't find anything in our manual that prohibits filming one's own seat." Frank shot her a look of pure venom. "The regulation is whatever I say it is. It's called maintaining order. He is creating a disturbance." "With all due respect, sir, you are the one who is yelling," a voice called out from the business class curtain. A man in a tailored suit, who had been observing the entire exchange, stepped forward. "I'm a lawyer, and I can tell you that you are on incredibly thin ice. You're escalating a situation that was a non-issue." Frank's head swiveled, his face contorting with rage. "You stay out of this. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns everyone when an airline employee starts inventing rules and threatening passengers," the lawyer retorted, not backing down. The cabin was now a tinderbox. Seeing the situation devolving, Desmond knew he had to make a choice. He could allow this to escalate further, let the police come and create a massive, ugly scene that would delay hundreds of people and become an immediate viral PR disaster for Aura. Or he could de-escalate, but on his own terms. The damage to the brand was already being done, filmed on a dozen phones. The key now was to collect the most potent data. He held up a hand, a gesture of calm that momentarily cut through the noise. "All right," he said, his voice carrying through the cabin. "There's no need for the police." Frank Miller smirked, a cruel, triumphant expression. He thought he had won. "Finally coming to your senses. Good. Now hand me the phone." "No," Desmond said, his voice firm but quiet. "I will not give you my phone. I will, however, stop recording, and I will put the phone away. Is that acceptable enough for you to allow this flight, which is already delayed because of this, to depart?" He was offering an off-ramp, a way for Frank to save face while still getting his way. It was a test. A reasonable manager would take the deal, de-escalate, and move on. A tyrant would push for total submission. Frank hesitated. The lawyer's words had clearly rattled him, and he was aware of the other phones filming him. Having the passenger escorted off by police would be a definitive victory, but it would also generate a mountain of paperwork and scrutiny. This was cleaner. Fine. He snapped, his ego still demanding the last word. Put the phone away. I want to see it go into your bag. And you can be sure the crew will be monitoring you for the entire flight. Any more trouble, and you'll be met by authorities in London. Am I clear? Crystal, Desmond said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He calmly slid his phone into his backpack and pushed it further under the seat in front of him. He then leaned back, folded his arms, and stared straight ahead, a statue of composure. Frank stood there for a moment, waiting for a flinch, a muttered curse, any sign of defeat. He received none. It was unsettling. He gave one last sweeping glare to the passengers, a silent warning to the other phone wielders, before turning on his heel. Close it up. Let's go, he barked at the cabin crew, before stomping off the plane and down the jet bridge. As the heavy cabin door finally swung shut with a pneumatic hiss, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the passengers. The engines began to whine, and the plane slowly pushed back from the gate. But the ordeal wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more claustrophobic phase. During the flight, Desmond felt the weight of the crew's attention. They were following Frank's orders. When the drink cart came around, he was served last, almost as an afterthought. His request for a full can of soda was met with a curt, "We can only give out cups." Even as the passenger across the aisle was handed a can, he was treated not as a person, but as a problem that had been temporarily contained. Jessica Davies, however, handled it differently. When she passed his row, she leaned in slightly. "Sir, I just want to apologize for what happened back there," she whispered, her eyes full of genuine remorse. "That was completely unprofessional and uncalled for." Desmond looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the stress in her face, but also the integrity. She was risking her job by even speaking to him this way, after her manager's explicit instructions. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. "I appreciate that. It's not your fault. It's not what we're supposed to be." She added, her voice barely audible, before moving on with her duties. That short interaction was for Desmond the single most important piece of data he had collected all day. It proved that the soul of his company wasn't dead. It was just being suffocated by people like Frank Miller. The problem wasn't the entire airline. It was a sickness in its management. A sickness he now had a very clear plan to cure. He spent the rest of the 7-hour flight in silence. He didn't read. He didn't watch a movie. He just sat and thought meticulously, planning his next moves. He replayed every moment of the confrontation in his mind. Frank's words, his tone, the fear in Brianne's eyes, the courage in Jessica's. He thought about the lawyer and the woman who had spoken up for him. These were his customers, and Frank Miller had declared war on them. As the coast of Ireland appeared outside his window, a patchwork of impossible green, Desmond felt a sense of cold, hard clarity. Frank Miller thought he had won a small battle of wills at Gate B24. He had no idea he had just started a war with the one man who couldn't possibly lose. The plane began its descent into Heathrow, and for Frank Miller, judgment was descending with it. While Desmond sat in the pressurized quiet of seat 28B, a silent digital storm was brewing across the globe. The moment he had slid his phone into his backpack, he had done one last thing. With his thumb hidden from Frank Miller's view, he had navigated to a secure messaging app and typed a single cryptic sentence to one person, his chief operating officer, Catherine Pierce. The message read, "Phoenix is compromised. Code Indigo at JFK B-24, Flight 8115. Let it play out. Full protocol on arrival at LHR." Catherine Pierce was a woman who operated with the precision of a surgeon and the foresight of a chess grandmaster. She and Desmond had been partners since his first startup. He was the visionary, the heart of the company. She was the strategist, the ruthlessly efficient mind that turned his visions into logistical reality. She understood his shorthand perfectly. Phoenix is compromised meant his cover was blown or an incident had occurred that required executive intervention. Code Indigo was their prearranged signal for a severe failure in customer service and corporate culture, specifically involving abuse of authority by management. JFK B-24 Flight 8115 was the location. Let it play out was the most critical instruction. It meant do not intervene yet. Do not call the airport. Do not contact the crew. Let the aggressor feel they have won. Let the situation reach its natural, ugly conclusion. Desmond needed the full, unvarnished dataset. Full protocol on arrival at LHR was the trigger for the response. Catherine was in her office in Chicago, a sleek, glass-walled space overlooking the city, when the message came through at 11:43 a.m. Central Time. Her face, normally a mask of calm control, tightened for a fraction of a second. A Code Indigo during a Phoenix run was the worst-case scenario. It meant the rot was not just at the front line, it was in the leadership. She immediately swiveled in her chair to a second encrypted monitor. With a few keystrokes, she accessed Aura's global CCTV network. She pulled up the feed for JFK Terminal 4, Gate B-24, time stamped for the last hour. She watched the entire confrontation unfold on the grainy, silent footage. She saw the gate agent call for a manager. She saw a man she recognized instantly from his file photo, Frank Miller, striding onto the jet bridge. She saw him looming over a passenger in a grey hoodie. She couldn't hear the words, but his aggressive body language, the jabbing finger, the visible anger, told her everything she needed to know. She saw him storm off, and the plane finally push back. Her next move was to access the flight's passenger manifest. She cross-referenced the seat number 28B with the name on the ticket David Wilson Desmond's current pseudonym. Then she pulled up Frank Miller's complete employee file. 15 years with the company, starting as a ramp agent. Multiple promotions. A recent performance review noted his efficiency in maintaining on-time departures, but also included several flagged comments from subordinates about his abrasive management style and intimidating demeanor. The flags had been noted by human resources, but dismissed as needing further observation. Catherine's lips thinned into a hard line. Further observation was corporate speak for, "We're ignoring it." The system had failed. She opened a secure conference line. Her first call was to Martin Shaw, Aura's head of European operations, based in London. "Martin," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Change of plans for your afternoon. I need you and your senior legal counsel at Heathrow. Gate arrival for Aura 8:15. We have a Code Indigo." There was a moment of silence on the other end. A Code Indigo was a rare and serious event. "Understood," Martin said, his voice instantly all business. "Who is the target?" JFK Regional Manager Frank Miller. "He is not on the flight, but he initiated the incident. The target for our immediate attention, however, is the integrity of the operation on arrival. I need a full executive greeting party. No uniforms, just suits. I want the highest level of corporate authority visible on that jet bridge. I'll be patched in via video. Consider it done, Catherine. Who is the passenger involved? David Wilson, seat 28B, she said, using the alias. But when you see him, you will address him as Mr. Grant. Is that clear? The implication was staggering. Martin's breath hitched. Good Lord. Yes, Catherine, perfectly clear. We'll be ready. Catherine's next call was to Aura's head of corporate security. I need a full social media sweep and passenger manifest cross-check for flight 815 JFK to LHR. I want to know if we have any journalists, lawyers, or high-profile influencers on board. I also want any and all social media posts tagged with Aura Airlines from the last hour monitored in real time. I suspect we're about to have a viral event, and I want to be ahead of it. Within minutes, her team was mobilized. They were a silent, invisible army, gathering intelligence, while Flight 815 was still a tiny speck over the Atlantic Ocean. They flagged the business-class lawyer who had confronted Miller. They identified the woman in the row behind Desmond, a mid-level travel blogger with a respectable following who had already posted a short, shaky video of Miller's tirade with the caption, "Unbelievable power trip from @Aura Airlines manager at JFK, harassing a passenger for no reason. Flight is super tense now." The post was already gaining traction. Likes and retweets were trickling in. Catherine watched the digital ripples spread. Desmond's instruction to let it play out was strategically brilliant. By not reacting immediately, they were allowing Frank Miller's toxicity to be fully documented, not by the company, but by the public. When Aura did respond, it would not be a corporation defending itself. It would be a corporation cleansing itself with the public as their witness. She spent the next few hours coordinating. A private car and security detail were arranged for Desmond at Heathrow. A full report, including Miller's file, the CCTV footage, and the blossoming social media reaction, was compiled into a secure digital briefcase for the board of directors. A draft of a public statement was being written, ready to be finalized by Desmond himself. As the flight began its descent over England, Catherine Pierce patched into the live feed from a small body camera worn by Martin Shaw, who was now standing discreetly near the arrival gate at Heathrow's Terminal 3. Through his eyes, she saw the sterile, quiet hallway that would soon become the stage for the final act. Everything was in place. The whisper sent from 30,000 feet had been heard, and the thunder was about to roll. 7 hours can feel like a lifetime in a compromised space. For the passengers and crew of Aura 815, the journey was marked by a quiet, strained formality. The crew, under orders to monitor Desmond, treated him with a cold professionalism that was arguably worse than overt hostility. They were avoiding a repeat of the confrontation, but in doing so, they cast him as a pariah. Every interaction was clipped, every request met with the bare minimum of service. Desmond, for his part, remained impassive, a silent observer in the eye of a storm only he truly understood. He watched as Jessica Davies, the flight attendant who had apologized, performed her duties with a heavy heart. He could see the conflict in her eyes every time she passed his row. She was caught between her training her conscience and the direct orders of a vindictive manager. Her subtle kindness earlier had been a small act of rebellion, and now she was paying for it with the stress of a compromised position. Desmond filed this away. Courage, he believed, should be rewarded as swiftly and decisively as incompetence should be punished. as the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated for the final time, and the plane broke through the perpetual grey cloud cover of London. The tension in the cabin began to dissipate, replaced by the usual rustle of passengers gathering their belongings. They were preparing to escape the flying theatre of drama they had been trapped in for hours. For them, the story was over. For Desmond Grant, it was just beginning. The touchdown at Heathrow was smooth. As the plane taxied towards the gate, Desmond felt none of the relief that usually comes with landing. Instead, he felt a cold, determined focus. The Phoenix Project had started as an exercise in quality control. It had now become a mission to reclaim the soul of his company. Meanwhile, in an operations office back at JFK, Frank Miller was finishing his shift. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He had faced down a troublemaker and won. He had asserted his authority and put the fear of God into the flight crew, ensuring they would never question him again. He had already filed his incident report, painting a heroic picture of himself de-escalating a potentially volatile passenger with aggressive recording habits who posed a security concern. He portrayed Desmond as a non-compliant agitator, and himself as a firm but fair enforcer of company policy. He recommended a no-fly flag be placed on the passenger's name, ensuring the man would be banned from Aura Airlines for life. He was in his own mind Employee of the Month. He was so confident in his version of events that he sent a follow-up email to Martin Shaw, the head of European operations in London, giving him a heads-up about the passenger arriving on Flight 815. Be advised, he wrote, passenger D. Wilson in 28B is a troublemaker. Caused a major scene at JFK. I had to put him firmly in his place. Your Heathrow staff should be aware in case he tries anything upon arrival. He hit send, picturing Martin being grateful for the warning. He had no idea he was sending a message to the very man who was at that exact moment preparing to professionally dismantle his entire career. He clocked out whistling a cheerful tune, completely oblivious to the corporate guillotine being sharpened for him across the ocean. Back at Heathrow, the plane finally docked with the jet bridge. The familiar thump echoed through the fuselage. The seatbelt sign pinged off. As passengers began to stand and retrieve their bags, Desmond remained seated. He was in no rush. He let the tide of humanity flow past him, the faces a mixture of weariness and relief. The woman who had filmed the incident gave him a small, sympathetic nod as she passed. The lawyer from business class caught his eye and gave a slight tip of his head, a gesture of respect. Desmond was one of the last to stand. He slung his simple backpack over his shoulder and began his walk down the aisle. The same aisle he had been marched down in disgrace by proxy just hours before. He stepped out of the aircraft and into the brightly lit, sterile environment of the jet bridge. And there, waiting just beyond the threshold, was the welcoming committee. It wasn't the usual ground staff. It was a group of 4 individuals, all dressed in immaculate business attire. They stood in a calm, formidable line. Desmond immediately recognized the man at the front. Martin Shaw, a sharp, silver-haired executive he had personally promoted 2 years ago. Beside him stood a woman Desmond knew to be Aura's top UK-based legal counsel. They were not looking at the stream of passengers. Their eyes were fixed, waiting for one person. As Desmond stepped into view, their posture shifted. Martin Shaw stepped forward, his expression a mixture of deep respect and profound concern. The other executives fell in line slightly behind him. The few remaining passengers and the flight crew, including Jessica Davies, who were deplaning behind Desmond, slowed down, their curiosity piqued. This was not a standard arrival procedure. Martin Shaw walked directly up to Desmond, bypassing everyone else. He extended his hand, not for a casual shake, but with a formal deference that was utterly unmistakable. "Mr. Grant," Martin said, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the low hum of the airport. "Welcome to London. We apologize for the lack of a more appropriate welcome. I'm Martin Shaw. We have a car ready for you, and Ms. Pierce is waiting on a secure line for your debrief." The world seemed to slow down. The name Mr. Grant hung in the air, charged with meaning. The flight attendants, who had just spent 7 hours treating this man like a nuisance, froze in place. Jessica Davies's face went from pale to ghostly white as the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The man in the grey hoodie. The man Frank Miller had threatened and humiliated. The man she had felt sorry for. It was Desmond Grant. The Desmond Grant. The almost mythical founder of the airline. Her mind reeled frantically, replaying every interaction. Her whispered apology. His quiet thank you. She felt a wave of nausea and terror, followed by a strange, dizzying sense of vindication. Desmond shook Martin's hand firmly. "Martin, thank you for being here. There's a lot to discuss." He then turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the stunned flight crew. His eyes met Jessica's. He held her gaze for a moment, and his expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He gave her a single slow nod. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise. It was an acknowledgement. "I saw you." In that moment, Jessica knew her career wasn't over. She might have just witnessed the beginning of a corporate revolution, and she had, by a simple act of human decency, found herself on the right side of it. The other crew members looked as if they had seen a ghost. The color drained from their faces as they understood the catastrophic miscalculation that had been made. Frank Miller hadn't disciplined a difficult passenger. He had assaulted the king in his own castle. Desmond turned back to Martin's team. "Before we go," he said, his voice calm, but with an undeniable edge of command, "there are a few things we need to address immediately." The final act was about to begin right there on the jet bridge of Heathrow's Terminal 3. The jet bridge, normally a transient, forgettable corridor, had become a silent courtroom. The jury was the dumbfounded flight crew and the few lingering passengers. The judges were the assembled executives, and the witness, prosecutor, and victim were all the same man, Desmond Grant. "First," Desmond said, turning his attention to the shell-shocked flight attendants. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an absolute authority that demanded and received total attention. "I want the full, unedited incident reports from every member of this flight crew on my desk by the time I land back in New York. I don't want the sanitized version. I want the truth of what you saw, what you were told, and how you were instructed to behave. Am I understood?" A chorus of panicked "Yes, sir," and "Yes, Mr. Grant" came from the crew. Desmond's gaze then settled once again on Jessica Davies. "Miss Davies," he said, his tone softening just enough to be noticeable. "Your report will be particularly important. Please be as detailed as possible." He knew her whispered apology would never make it into an official report unless he gave her the implicit safety to do so. This was his signal. He then turned back to Martin Shaw. "Martin, has there been any communication from Mr. Miller?" Martin held up a tablet. "He sent me this email about an hour ago, sir." He showed Desmond the screen, displaying Frank's self-aggrandizing message about the troublemaker, D. Wilson. A humorless smile touched Desmond's lips. "Of course he did. He's documenting his own execution." "Perfect." He handed the tablet back. "Catherine is on the line." "Yes, sir. Secure video link," Martin confirmed, Patch her through. Let's do this now." Martin handed Desmond an encrypted satellite phone. On the small screen, Catherine Pierce's face appeared sharp and focused. "Desmond," she said, "I've seen the footage. The social media chatter is growing. The blogger's post has over 10,000 retweets. How do you want to proceed?" "We proceed as planned, Catherine," Desmond said, walking slowly towards the gate, the executive team flanking him like a Secret Service detail. The flight crew followed at a distance, too terrified to leave, too stunned to do anything else. "Is our head of HR on the line with you?" "He is," Catherine confirmed. "Excellent. I want Mr. Frank Miller's employment with Airlines terminated, effective immediately." Even though they were expecting it, the words landed with the finality of a gavel strike. "On what grounds specifically?" Catherine asked, already knowing the answer, but needing it for the record. "Gross misconduct, willful violation of company ethics policies, 3.1 and 4.2 regarding passenger treatment and de-escalation, abuse of authority, creating a hostile environment for both passengers and crew. And for good measure," Desmond added, with a touch of ice in his voice, "knowingly filing a false incident report that misrepresents a professional interaction with the CEO of this company. I think that should cover it." "The termination notice is being drafted as we speak," Catherine said. "He will be notified by email, and a certified letter will be sent to his home. His system access and credentials will be revoked within the next 5 minutes." Back in New York, it was early afternoon. Frank Miller had just sat down at a Swartz bar, with a few colleagues laughing as he recounted his heroic tale of putting a difficult passenger in his place. His phone buzzed on the table. It was an email from corporate HR. The subject line was stark: "Notification of employment termination." He frowned, thinking it was spam. He opened it. As he read the formal, brutal language, the color drained from his face. "Effective immediately. Gross misconduct. Abuse of authority." His bravado vanished, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He tried to log into his work email on his phone. Access denied. He tried to open the company's internal network. Invalid credentials. The laughter died in his throat. His colleagues stared at him, confused by his sudden silence and pallor. In the space of 30 seconds, his 15-year career, his authority, his entire professional identity had been vaporized by an email sent from a server 3,000 miles away, on the command of the man he had threatened just hours earlier. Back at Heathrow, Desmond was not finished. "Martin," he said, turning to the European chief, "I want you to personally call Brianne, the gate agent at JFK B-24. I want you to tell her she is being placed on paid administrative leave, pending a full review and retraining. I don't want her fired. I want her re-educated. She was acting under duress from a toxic manager. We need to find out if she can be saved." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the crew again. "The same goes for this flight crew. A full debriefing and mandatory retraining in the Aura standard of customer care for everyone, except for Ms. Davies." He looked directly at Jessica. "Jessica Catherine will be in touch with you. We're creating a new position, in-flight customer experience auditor. It will be a senior role, reporting directly to the COO's office. You'll fly our routes not as a flight attendant, but as an observer to ensure the standards we set in the boardroom are the standards we practice at 30,000 feet. The job is yours if you want it." Jessica stared at him, her mouth agape. Tears welled in her eyes as she processed the impossible whiplash of the last 10 minutes. From fearing for her job to being offered a promotion by the company's founder. She could only manage a choked, "Thank you, sir." Yes, thank you. Desmond gave her a final nod. His work here was done. The immediate crisis was handled. The message had been sent. "Let's go," he said to Martin. "I need a shower and a strong cup of coffee. We have a press release to write." As Desmond Grant and his executive team swept out of the gate area and into the private diplomatic channels of the airport, they left behind a tableau of stunned silence. The remaining crew members looked at each other, the full terrifying and awesome scope of what had just happened finally sinking in. They had been unwitting actors in a real-life corporate drama, a morality play about power, prejudice, and the brutal, swift nature of consequence. The story of Aura Flight 8115 was over, but the legend of the man in seat 28B was just beginning. The fallout from the incident on Flight 815 was not a quiet internal affair. It was a strategic public declaration of war against the corporate apathy that Desmond Grant despised. Before he had even reached his London hotel, the story, expertly guided by Catherine Pierce's team, was already taking shape online. The travel blogger's video of Frank Miller's tirade was now bolstered by a second video taken by the lawyer in business class, which offered a clearer, more damning view of the confrontation. Aura's social media team didn't delete the posts or issue denials. Instead, they engaged. They responded to the blogger directly. @Travel. Bug Life. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is not the Aura standard. The incident is under the highest level of review. We will be in touch. Then came the official statement. It was posted on all of Aura's social media channels and sent to every major news outlet. It wasn't written by a PR team. It was written by Desmond Grant himself from his hotel suite, and it was a masterpiece of corporate accountability. It began today. One of our passengers was subjected to unacceptable treatment by a manager at JFK. This passenger was harassed, threatened, and humiliated for quietly documenting his travel experience. The manager's actions were a betrayal of our values and a disgrace to our uniform. I know this because I was that passenger. The statement sent shockwaves through the media and the business world. It was raw, personal, and utterly devastating. Desmond went on to detail the immediate termination of Frank Miller, and then he pivoted. He didn't just apologize. He outlined a plan. He announced the immediate implementation of a new company-wide initiative called the Grant Standard. It was a multi-million-dollar investment in comprehensive, continuous training for every single employee, from baggage handlers to pilots. The core curriculum would be based on empathy de-escalation and a simple guiding principle: treat every passenger as if they own the company, because they do. Their trust is our most valuable asset. He announced the promotion of Jessica Davies by name, holding her up as the example of an employee who embodied the true spirit of Aura. He announced the retraining of the rest of the crew, framing it not as a punishment, but as a recommitment to their shared values. The story became an international sensation. It was a modern-day undercover boss with brutally high stakes. News channels ran segments on it. Business schools began preparing case studies. Desmond Grant was lauded as a new kind of leader, one who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, to subject himself to the worst parts of his own business to make it better. Aura Airlines, which could have suffered a catastrophic PR disaster, was suddenly being praised for its transparency and decisive action. Bookings after a brief dip surged. People wanted to fly with an airline whose leader cared that much. The karma for Frank Miller was swift and hard. Fired for gross misconduct, he found himself unemployable in the airline industry. The videos were everywhere. His name was now synonymous with managerial abuse. He tried to sue for wrongful termination, but Aura's legal team, armed with the multiple passenger videos, his own fraudulent incident report, and Desmond's first-hand testimony, had the case dismissed before it even began. He lost his house within the year and was last heard of working a minimum-wage security job, a shadow of the puffed-up tyrant who once patrolled the halls of JFK. For Desmond, the Phoenix Project had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. It had exposed a cancer within his company, and he had excised it with surgical precision. He made good on his promises. The Grant Standard was implemented rigorously. Every new hire at Aura Airlines as part of their orientation now watched the footage from Flight 855, the footage from Desmond's own phone. They saw Frank Miller's rage. They saw the passengers' fear. And they heard the story of the flight attendant who was promoted for a simple act of whispered decency. The culture of the airline began to shift slowly but surely. Employees felt empowered to do the right thing, knowing that leadership not only had their backs, but was also quietly watching from the most unexpected places. Customer satisfaction scores began to climb, this time for real. Desmond Grant never stopped his Phoenix flights. He continued to fly economy, a ghost in his own machine, forever taking its pulse. He knew that a company's soul wasn't a mission statement hanging on a wall. It was a living thing, tested and proven every day in the cramped aisles and bustling terminals, in the thousands of small interactions that could either honor or betray the simple promise of humanity in motion. The story of Desmond Grant and Frank Miller is a powerful reminder that true authority isn't found in a title or a uniform, but in character and integrity. It shows us that in any situation, from a crowded airport gate to the highest corporate office, our actions define us. Frank Miller, blinded by prejudice and ego, saw a problem to be crushed and ended up destroying his own career. Desmond Grant, in his search for truth, endured humiliation to ultimately heal the company he built. He proved that the best leaders don't command from a distance. They lead by example, even when no one knows they're watching. This event didn't just change an airline. It sent a ripple of accountability through an entire industry. If this story of karmic justice and true leadership resonated with you, please give this video a like to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who appreciates a story where the right thing wins. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of real-life drama and the powerful consequences of our choices. Thank you for listening.